Hey guys, I've got my heater on. I hope it's not too distracting, but I wanted to talk about the ways in which our false allegiance kind of impedes and impacts a lot of Black people within the community and keeps a lot of people bound. So I've heard a lot of Black scholars, people that I've looked up to on the internet as far as their work and things like that. We know we have the internet. I don't really need to go into depth about this. But I've had a lot of Black scholars whose work I've admired, and over the years I've kind of seen their work shift from African American studies and African American history to entertainment. And I think a lot of people really kind of toe that line, especially when it comes to African Americans, because I think every Black scholar and every Black intellect, and it's not to say that not everybody is intelligent, but we know that there are a lot of people, who do the work, who do the research, who, are really avid readers in regards to African American history, who are observers of culture. There's a different category for those people, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's that's the truth. I think that they realize that we are the minority, right? Because for me to constantly make videos to people who understand everything that I'm saying would be slightly pointless. And a lot of times those are the people who are not going to watch the videos. But if I talk about things that center around entertainment, center around things that are a little bit more easy to digest, then I can garner a larger audience. And so when I think about a lot of the conversations that we have today, especially in this upholding of these very negative and harmful stereotypes about Black people, especially as it relates to entertainment, there's always kind of this thing where it's we really try to stick by this and be oh, entertainment doesn't do anything, and behaving this way and acting this way doesn't do anything. And the extremes that we go to kind of silo the voices of quote unquote Black conservatives, which I would kind of consider myself conservative. I told you guys, I shared a little bit about me. I grew up in a very conservative state. So, that's just kind of how I grew up. And honestly, looking back, hindsight, and here I am today, I can honestly say that it has been probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Sure, was there some void of culture? You know what I mean? But I just think about the culture that is within those communities, and the culture that a lot of people gravitate to. I use Miles Davis and Nina Simone because obviously they're really prominent entertainers and historical figures who have really pushed the culture forward with their work. But you can look at other entertainers, James Brown and so forth, but we're not talking about the personal lives. We're talking about the excellence that they embodied in their work and how, in regards to entertainment, it's lost on them, right? Because of the lack of historical context, our entertainment is always seen as this very raunchy type of thing, which makes it easy for a lot of people to believe that they can do it. So the biggest thing, right? I made this video prior, a lot of people today, especially Black people, and it's not just today, it's been all over the spectrum, right? Unfortunately, for so many of us, a lot of people gravitate towards these very raunchy, hood-like, kind of ghetto, stereotypical images of Black people because it's something that's seen in the media. So they gravitate towards these representations that are represented within entertainment, and that is something that they actually start to live out within their lives. So when we talk about the youth, people who are young eventually become adults. And we can look at this with older people who, are not in the best position as they grow older, right? They didn't build a life for themselves. They didn't build careers. And if you're someone who thinks, okay, we know there are different governmental programs and different programs that help other people, there's generational wealth. I'm going to share a little bit of a story that I've learned, and you're going to take this how you're going to take this. And quite frankly, I can't appease. I'm here to teach, okay? So I thought the same thing, right? I read Poverty by Matthew Desmond, and, it was on Obama's, I think it was 2020, 2022 yearly book read or whatever, or books to read or whatever. And he did talk about a lot of the different supplemental programs that white people can get, right? Talk about racial disparities in terms of poverty, right? That is a thing. There are a lot of programs sometimes and a lot more resources. But I also realized that a lot of times there's a lack of knowledge within what is accessible and what isn't in regards to Black communities, right? So I met someone who told me that they had absolutely no money, growing up, and this is someone who's built wealth in their lives. Granted, they did have generational wealth. She told me that, they did have their parents pass on a house. But obviously she's a much older woman. So yes, we know the economy is different, but just stick with me because I want to talk about some very key things as I'm telling this story. So stick with me. And she talked about how her husband worked in nonprofit. He worked in nonprofit his whole life. She said that she was a teacher, so they made absolutely no money. She said that he came over with debt because he was a doctor, or he had a PhD. I don't know in what, but he had a PhD. she said that for her to achieve financial freedom, she went through just a lifetime of frugality, right? She said that the way that they pay for their kids college funds was through, programs that allow you to invest, and they match your kids tuition once you get older, right? So they'll do a match. So you would invest a certain amount of money when the child is born, essentially. And then once the child is ready to go to college, they'll match that. You'll look up, it's been, 18, however so many years, and this child is loaded. And if you can find a program that is tax-free or stock tax, then you'll be able to actually get money back that may not cover their tuition, right? So there may be a bit of a surplus, and then you can take that money for your retirement. So that's T. So you see how it's like conversations, but when you don't have anybody who's in these spaces to tell you these things, that's how it's going to get lost on you. But I started thinking about her advice in terms of frugality and living a very conservative life in terms of your spending. Now, we can look into the politics because I do think that there is a fashion politic for African Americans. I do think that, yes, we are very, very flavorful, cultured in that sense, that we're very fashionable. But I do think that the pressure for materialism is very high, and it's on. And I don't think it's anything that's perpetuated by other people outside of those within our communities. And that's very harmful. So I think that that's one thing that really impedes us in our ability to build wealth. And then for me, I actually grew up, my grandparents, they migrated from the south to the north. My grandparents owned a farm. They've owned multiple properties. I'm talking about, it was a multi-family unit. There was a house, and they owned the church. And the generation coming prior to receive that inheritance, they were the generation born within that crack boom, thing like that. That segment in history. I don't know why I said thing like that, but that segment in history. And so when my grandparents died, they left them all this money. They were all taken away, at least like, a couple thousand, but they sold everything. I mean, they sold the farm, they sold everything. So when you start thinking about the inferiority complexes that are sometimes upheld and that will really breed, generations of inferiority, generations of mediocrity to the extent of, you don't even try, right? Because I'm really concerned with a lot of people saying we need to forego Black excellence. That is a concern to me, because why? When we're capable, right? I give the examples again of entertainers such as Nina Simone and Miles Davis for the work and the excellence, right? That created that, right? The impetus, right? That then birthed the excellence in the music that we enjoy, right? Why do we want to forego that? You know what I mean? Why do we want to forego the excellence why do we want to forego that? So I think in a lot of ways, like I said, it's lost on a lot of people. I thought the Black scholars who studied African American history who would get that, but I find a lot of times they are encouraging, the very destructive behavior. So I just don't really know where to go from here. I think something that also really concerns me is that for a lot of Black people, because the history is lost on us, because the representation is lost on us, we don't seem to find a way to connect the dots and understand that we too were conservative. Black people were Christians. We've always been Christians. That's why we're Christians today. You know what I mean? And then you start looking at Christianity in terms of what is the narratives around Christianity, and what ways do we, keep each other back by kind of like I'm maybe canceling Christianity, I guess you could say. I had a question. I said, why is it that so many Black scholars seem to forego Christianity? They look at it from this very critical standpoint, and it's like, oh, it's the white man. But it's like, everybody knows if you do the work and the research, there's a lot of truth, right, in our origins in Christianity, even dating back to Africa. You know what I mean? We know that there's a lot of truth in what that representation was and what it was swapped to and how, you know what I mean? So it's just like, why do we do this? And then it's like, nobody even reads the Bible, like I'm saying, like the people who, like the things that go on within this country, you're just not gonna be able to make it. Like, you're not gonna be able to make it without God. Like, you're just not. Like, it's just way too much of a battle to fight by yourself. Like, the plight of injustice is so heavy. Like, that's a very heavy burden to be carrying all by yourself. And so I think there's something that happens there that I think, again, for me personally, from what I've experienced, or at least what I've witnessed, is that a lot of times it's just seen as the cool or popular thing to just not be a Christian, because it's like you get to just be this rebel. And I think this is also where we have a lot of the chaos, right? And so because we don't have representations of ourselves as sophisticated, we don't have representations of ourselves, and this is not for everybody. You know, for me, I grew up seeing these representations, so I think that's why I am the way I am today, right? But when you don't grow up seeing those things, right? You don't grow up seeing, you know, historical images of Black women who were very much conservative and very much fabulous as well, right? Fabulous and fashionable, and, you know, hair was kept, and there wasn't a lot of wigs and weaves. Like, when you don't have that representation, it's going to be very easy for you to gravitate towards things that are very destructive, right? It's going to be easy for you to gravitate towards those stereotypes. And because it's lucrative, right? Because the sad truth is that a lot of our brothers and sisters who really need our help, who actually want to come out of, you know, the stereotypes that they've embodied and upheld in their lives, a lot of times they can't just easily transition into conservatism, or they can't just transition into certain communities, because it's like a crab in a bucket to the extent that their behavior and those stereotypical images that they've upkept about themselves are then encouraged by their peers, right? By those who look like them. And so it kind of becomes this very detrimental cycle. That doesn't mean you have to negate culture. I don't know why we feel like, you know, but I just think to teach children that there's not a time and a place. You know what I mean? To teach children that this is okay, and never say, hey, this is wrong. Hey, this is not. That's gonna be a byproduct of the very thing that we're fighting to get out of. And that's the thing that upkeeps and sustains, you know what I mean, just generations of misery. You know what I mean? Honestly, it's really misery. Like, poverty is traumatic, you know? So it's just like, I was talking about the YouTube video I made when I was just saying, like, hey, listen, I've been lied to about college. We've all been lied to about college. I don't know why, you know, those who went to college who have way better outcomes regardless, you know what I mean? Most people regardless, right? Why do they then tell other Black people not to go to college? You know what I mean? Why would you encourage that? Like, I don't understand. When you know a lot of times people coming out of these communities, what is the alternative, right? This is why we have, you know what I mean, all these other things within the community, right? I was reading this book about intelligence, and it just talked about, you know, women who give birth before the age of 21, and how for a lot of us, it's multiple kids by the age of 23. And that's not everybody, right? The woman that I spoke about earlier told me that she had a granddaughter who was 25, who had, you know, 2 kids, and her family wasn't too ecstatic about that. So I just think that it's not always a race thing. I think that race is definitely, it's real, it's a thing. But I just think when you start talking about culture and you get a little bit more experience, you start to realize that it's people, and we're all lied to a little bit, you know what I mean? Some more than others, you know, but ignorance is the byproduct, right? Ignorance is something that really just kind of sells. I mean, it benefits for a lot of people. If you don't know something, you have to pay somebody, you know what I mean? You got to go see somebody, and that puts money in somebody's pockets, you know, that provides a sense of service, right? So it's just like, when you're really, really at like a deficit in terms of knowledge and wisdom, that's not gonna set you up to make good decisions in life. And so I just think that we do a very, very big disservice when we sit up here and we perpetuate these things all in the name of anti-Blackness. And it's just like, why does, and people say, oh, it's not monolithic, but it is. We all have a very much universal understanding of what it is. We're all in the same accord about the narrative. And when that narrative shifts, or when someone deviates, or someone introduces a new idea such as this one, this person is then seen as ridiculed by the Black community and almost like bullied, to the extent of they're almost being pushed into a whole nother culture, because it's like, because you said you don't agree with something on the forefront, and you don't agree with, you know, and you clearly see the byproduct. Like I said, I just think a lot of times when we have these conversations, people forget that the vast majority of Black people are not in these, like, and not where they want to be. They're not in healthy spaces. You know what I mean? There's a lot of poverty, not just, you know, materialistically, but spiritually, you know what I mean? Mentally, you know what I mean? Like, it's emotionally, like, there's so much. And so I just think a lot of times, you know, Black scholars do a disservice. And I'm not speaking in generalizations. I'm just speaking on some of the Black scholars that have pretty large platforms, who come online and, you know, talk negatively about Black conservatives to the extent, hold on now, you know, to the extent of obtaining very negative stereotypes about Black people, the ones that perpetuate our disadvantage. So that's something that alarms me, because these people have benefited from the very thing, the very conservatism that they are obtaining in their lives. And sure, they can come online and they'll share things about, you know, whatever, but it's like, okay, but how are they living in their real lives? Very conservatively. You know, they're not out here doing that and acting that way. They're not getting the same outcomes as you. You know why? Because they're not living the way in which you're living. You're really embodying these stereotypes. They're just coming on encouraging the stereotype because it's like the group kind of like thing to do, the cultural thing to do, but they're not actually living that way. They're actually living very conservative. And it's, you can say that that's a white thing. I would say that that's more of an American thing. I think we give white institutions a little bit too much power. And this is why I go back to representation, because we are American. Like, yeah, we were the laborers, but we were also here. We were here. We were here. We're still living. Like, we have a history here. Like, it's not just all American. It's not just white. Like, we are American, African American. So it's just like, no. Why are we failing to acknowledge that we very much have representation? We very much have the same, you know what I mean? We can have the same views or certain things. Like, we are American.